Okay. So, I am very interested in how stories come out of the body and out of sound. And so a lot of times in, for example, some of my new work, I'm locating it. I'm really trying to locate sound in the body and find the extensions into the external space. And out of that, sometimes, in that particular way of improvising, I find little stories, and then they go back into the fabric of, being back in the body, finding its place again in the breath. And but storytelling, I guess it's something that's just, I'm so interested in how memory works and the subjective nature of memory. And I started making pieces that were about trying to really kind of hone in on specific memories and specific places. So, and then that all goes together. In one of the pieces that I made, A Little Town of East New York, it was made kind of like a film, in the sense that I was with my partner, David Weinstein, who was playing keyboards, and I said, okay, just tiny, short little bits that have, maybe this one goes from low to high, and anyway, and so I found a character within each of these little musical episodes, and they grew together. Like, I would hear something, and it suddenly spoke to me of the woman down the street. Things like that. And then we put in some longer pieces, which were then developed, and kind of a story developed out of little sequences that were extended. And so I like to play with storytelling in a kind of longer form way, even though it's mostly not very linear, kind of shifting fabrics, and also just finding a story through the movement or just an abstract sound. So I have to figure out what more to say. I'm trying to see what words you're going to come up with next. And you might even come back to a word, right? So that can happen. Well, awareness. I am looking and listening for material all the time. And there's a difference in the work that I do that's improvised work and composing. But in any piece I do, there's a sense of trying to be very much in the moment and discovering something special about that moment, even in its mundanity. And consciousness, letting go, like trusting that you can take something somewhere and not even know where it's going to land, and there's an excitement in that. And so I'm drawing on the subconscious, the unconscious, and turning it into the conscious, and then taking a look at it and seeing what can be built, from that moment where something lands in your hand from out of your body, out of your breath, out of the sound, and you turn it into something else, and a story can be formed. Kind of redundant from what I was saying before, but nonetheless. So what was that? Awareness, consciousness, and performance. Okay, well, in performance, well, I guess that, of course, there are pieces which I've done many times, and I always leave a tiny little space to draw off of the audience, but they're rather composed. And then there are the pieces in which I'm totally relying on the audience, on observing someone's glasses to give me the next little moment in a chain of thought, idea, music, process, building, composition, instantly composing and thinking very fast, and lucky to have little bits of someone's feet to draw on at a particular moment that seems to fit into the texture of the improvisation. Finding the location and the time, the amount of time and rhythm where a sentence will jump at me. So if I'm just trying to think of giving you an example of something. If I'm on a certain rhythm like this and it's going on, and then how will I place the idea of that willow tree? And what will that do to the foot beneath the table there? And how will I put those all together, and just taking chunks of things and building upon them? That wasn't a good example, looking at your foot under the table there, but nonetheless, things like that happened. And when they're tethered to the music that I'm making, that also obviously contributes. The music guides a lot of that if I'm performing with somebody. Now I'm thinking of doing things, and like I'm walking down the street because I'm thinking, okay, I'm just going to do pieces that are only my voice. And I walk, and I use the rhythm of my walking and what I'm seeing, and I add to the structure of it all, and what comes out and about in the lane as I'm walking and the rain is falling on me. Not necessarily so musical-like. Yeah. Okay. So, I'm a little sleepy right now. I'll have to go on. I like to keep myself off the track. In the sense I'm talking about locating and following a train of thought or a stream of consciousness, and then shift. So these breaks can happen. They're still within the body and obviously coming out of the same person and in the same physical location. But I very much enjoy finding ways to break the thought and find something, a surprise outside of that. Like when I'm doing the workshops, I was talking with you about how I would get people to sing a melody and without thinking about it at all, turning and finding a sentence describing what they're looking at right now, like that box of elephants over there. No, that's not an elephant, I meant envelope. And just catching something without thinking. How to really take a risk and just go for it. So I think of, is that on the line of what you're thinking? It's interesting as I'm sitting here and being very static. I'm used to kind of like moving around and pulling things out of my body or in the room. So here I am in this place and it's affecting my thinking. Oh no. Well, I think of calibrating as adjusting, kind of adjustments. Actually, I have to watch out with making too many adjustments sometimes. I find that in my writing or my making music, that the first thing that comes out is actually the freshest and it has a charge. And then if I start to try to adjust it too much, it gets stiff, it loses something. Unless I really work through it, really deeply try to come to another level with it. But all the little adjustments that happen along the way, for example, I talk to students about finding the tiny little sound at the end of your phrase and using that little sound at the end in a consequent way, not to forget that. That's something that can push you on to the next idea or the next little musical fragment. I love that. That's my favorite thing. You never expected that. And the tiny, tiny little things that are maybe even a drop of liquid that's in your mouth at that moment, how to take and let that grow. So you have to really listen for that and to be very conscious of how you're producing the sound. I might want to take that back because I like losing a bit. I'm very at my old age, I am very able to locate where the sound is coming from. So in terms of being able to reproduce that sound, if I say, I just heard that, well, I can go, and know where it is all coming from. And then I swish it around in my mouth, and I swish it around in my brain, and I put it out in the room and stick my arms out. You can't see that, but they help me a lot. Like, I'm very often playing with foreground and background in that way, and taking a little, like a magnifying glass, to then zoom into that tiny little sound, and suddenly it might come and turn into somebody speaking. All from the tiny little thing growing out of that. And I love those transformations and thinking about foreground and background. Again, somehow cinema comes into play. And I remember as a kid watching those Busby Berkeley movies or the old Max Fleischer cartoons, where one event happening on one plane suddenly turns into something so kaleidoscopic that's happening in another totally different plane, and goes from a narrative to something so abstract. And that's important in my work. And that started to become something I was very aware of when I was doing experimental theater. We used our voices only. There was no music and no special lighting, and it really, we started out telling a story and coming in with a memory and then shifting it into creating an environment, which would then go into these biblical stories, and then back into the environment and the individual taking focus, and then back into the group. And I feel like I was 18 when I was in that group, and 19 when I was touring with them, and it was one of the most important periods of my life in terms of figuring out my deep, essential interests. As a kid, I was also putting on performances in the hallways of my buildings and mixing and collaging, and that was another way of collaging in a sense. So collage is something I used to say it was very postmodern, because I was, as a kid, mixing styles, taking the kids and performing on the stairwells, going downstairs with the parents standing at the side, and really playing with the acoustics and what also that suggested. I think I had found a book, Midsummer's Night's Dream, and the book was so beautiful. It was a hard-covered book. I remember the little tiny silver stitching in it and the beautiful pages with very old print, black and kind of thick. And I didn't know it was Shakespeare. I was 10, but it turned out to be Shakespeare. And wow, taking these little bits that came out of this precious find. And it wasn't that precious. It wasn't like jewels. Yet to me it had, the weight, the look, the writing, the color, the softness, silkiness of the pages. And all of that made me want to make a piece and hear how some of the reading of it would resonate in the hallway. And then we got down to the little courtyard, which I've gone back to visit recently, and I was thinking it's a big courtyard, but it's actually smaller than this room, where 4 buildings connected, and people could look down. And I put on these performances. I was fascinated by different cultures and time periods, so then I'd make a fashion show. And as the music, a medley of songs from different cultures, and I'd make one costume, and that would remind me, there was a song we learned. Did you ever hear of Sweet Betsy from Pike? And so I made a little outfit. I don't even know what came first. And that was also, for me, those kind of things where I'm listening to the way sound, music, or just voices, or the sound of a typewriter in the hallway, and then what it sounded like coming out of the apartment. I talk about this a lot in my work, the enchanted room, when my father came home and turned, manual labor, walked into the living room, lifted up I don't remember exactly how. It was wood, because we had these high fidelity record players, wood, and you lifted the lid, and then he got the record, put it on, and then we started dancing. And so music wasn't just the song that was playing, it was what happened in the whole room, the transformation, what happened to that room when the music came on, and then taking it into the other room, just a little piece of sound, and listening to it grow in the hallway, and then listening to the way someone's door might open, and you would hear someone typing or cooking or whatever, and it also, so all these things were mixing together, and I was just always fascinated by it all mixing together. I'm grateful that I am inspired. Very grateful. That's the blessing, to find something that might not be important or beautiful to anyone else, and look at the way the light falls on that, and so, or hearing someone's story and suddenly getting all excited and finding the connections, that the different levels of things that happen within that person's story. And I'm also, I don't want to be corny, but I'm very grateful that I can inspire people. I think being able to move people, it's important for me that humanity is there, and I very much appreciate that people can appreciate my work on different levels, even if they know nothing about experimental music. They can find something to connect to, because it's really coming out of the human being and our imagination, and how we can look, and how everybody maybe can stretch their mind a little to find all these special things. And if you put it into a context where people can trust you. Sometimes I've hated that I have technique, because I wished I could be just the kind of raw singer like in the old 80s things like DNA, Arda Lindsay, just screaming and listen to, whatever, and it doesn't need, and I used to get hired more because I could really sing the melodies and do more complicated things. And I want to just find that raw part. Well, now I can find those sounds. I can find that place. I can go pretty deeply and genuinely into many different places that seemed maybe not so accessible at another time for me. I think in the classes that I give, I just get people to drop their guard and find new material and not even judge each other, because there are people often at different levels. So there's no way, because everybody brings something totally different to the situation. That sounds yick. Delete that part. No, I've spoken more articulately about it before. That is a way that I think I inspire people. I'm very glad that some of the storytelling pieces, which I thought, who's going to care about my story about growing up in East New York, Brooklyn, and who would have thought getting letters from someone in Siberia or Switzerland or Italy or South America somewhere telling me that it made them remember their rooms. It wasn't like the people that were actually growing up in the community where I grew up. It wasn't them saying, oh yes, I remember the bread. Oh God, I went to that place. I had that bread. It was marvelous. It's more people actually saying, oh, you described that glass, and I remember holding a glass in my hand when blah, blah, blah happened. So it's triggering things in people. And that's exciting, because they go along with you, and it doesn't just stop there. Because imagine, remember, sometimes realize, wow, how can I do that? And I think I like to make it seem that it's really possible for people to... I make it possible for people to see what they can do that they didn't think they could do. And just to be free, actually. And you know what I mean by free in that way, without judgment or self-consciousness. That's really important to get rid of that. I mean, I remember being very self-conscious myself when I was performing, and now I have the trust to just let things go, and pieces that I've already done and know the music so well, that just allows me to kind of go deeper with it and pull other things out of it. So, I don't know, does that make sense to you? You know, there are so many people, I think, I don't want to get into a male-female gender thing here, where guys will often sit around and develop a sound, especially musical guys. And my way was happening on it, and then just letting it develop organically, like I was saying. I remember the first time I discovered the sound. I don't know if I can do it now. I I was recording with David Weinstein, he went out of the room and he left. He had this piece, a repetitive ostinato thing, not an ostinato, an electronic music thing that was on a loop. And I was just sitting there going, ah! And oh my God, I can't believe, actually I say that on the record, I can't believe what I just found. And then I'd go back to it. And so for me, it's about discovering something and then taking it. I guess I've been describing that all along. When I started doing more glottal stop things and, listen to how. So it wasn't only developing a technique, it was traveling with the sound and discovering it as I went along, as I go along. Letting it lead me. Leading it.